Hello. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge something important. When disability exists within a family, whether that disability affects a child, parent, sibling, partner, or another loved one, it changes the emotional landscape of everyday life, and that experience can bring up many different emotions. Some emotions may feel expected, like concern, protectiveness, love, and determination, where others can feel more difficult to admit, such as exhaustion, frustration, grief, guilt, resentment, and fear about the future. All of these are normal human responses to living with ongoing challenge, uncertainty, and adaptation. This short course aims to explore understanding the deeper impact of disability beyond diagnosis, making sense of emotional and behavioral responses, learning practical tools for everyday family life, and supporting sustainable well-being for the whole family system. This will give you a greater understanding of how to navigate some of your daily challenges. I'd like you to take a moment, just quietly, in your own mind, and reflect on the following question. What has been the most challenging part of disability in your family? Not what others see, but what you experience. Hold on to that, and we'll come back to it. Moving beyond diagnosis, the real experience of disability. When most people hear the word disability, they think of a label or a diagnosis. But in therapeutic work, we move beyond labels and look at lived experience. The biopsychosocial lens. We use something called the biopsychosocial model, which helps us understand three interacting layers. Living with a disability doesn't just affect the body, but the individual as a whole. The biopsychosocial model highlights how our biological, psychological, and social factors work together to shape our health experience. This model helps explain the complex emotional journey individuals go through. The biological layer. This is the physical, neurological, sensory, cognitive, or medical aspects of a person. The psychological layer. These are our thoughts, emotions, stress, identity, coping, confidence, and self-worth. The social layer. These are our relationships, finances, education, work, caregiving demands, community attitudes, and environmental barriers. Making it real. Two people may have the same diagnosis but experience life very differently. For example, two adults may both live with chronic pain. One person has supportive relationships, financial security, flexibility at work, and understanding from others, whereas the other experiences disbelief from people around them, pressure to continue functioning normally, financial stress, and little emotional support. So you can see how the same condition can have a very different emotional impact. And the same is true for children, parents, and siblings, as well as carers. A key insight here is that disability impact is not about the condition itself, it's about how the world responds, how families adapt, and how the individual experiences themselves within that system. Think about your own situation. Which of these three areas, biological, psychological, or social, feels like it has the biggest impact right now? Emotional impact, the hidden layer. The emotional impact of disability often goes unspoken, but for individuals with disabilities, they may be experiencing chronic frustration, anxiety, especially around unpredictability, sensory overwhelm, feeling misunderstood, and difficulty expressing internal experiences. Sometimes what might look like challenging behavior is actually distress, confusion, or overload. Disability also affects those around the individual. Parents, partners, siblings, children, and carers may experience chronic stress, emotional fatigue, role overload, relationship strain, guilt, grief, helplessness, isolation, or pressure to always cope. Sometimes people feel they must stay strong all of the time, and over time, this can become emotionally exhausting. I'd like to talk to you now about a therapeutic concept, ambiguous loss. The idea of ambiguous loss was developed by Pauline Boss and is one of the most helpful frameworks for understanding the emotional experience many families face when living with disability. At its core, ambiguous loss is grief without clear resolution. Unlike more recognized forms of grief, where there is a clear event, a defined loss, and often social rituals of support, ambiguous loss is ongoing, unclear, and often invisible to others. What makes this type of loss different? Traditional grief tends to have a clear beginning, a diagnosis, death, or event, social recognition, I'm sorry for your loss, a process that moves, however slowly, towards acceptance. Ambiguous loss, however, is characterized by uncertainty. What will the future look like? Lack of closure. Is this permanent? Will things change? Invisibility. Others may not recognize it as grief. Recurrence. It resurfaces at different life stages. This makes it uniquely complex and often more emotionally exhausting. How it shows up in disability contexts. In families supporting someone with a disability, ambiguous loss often appears as a quiet, ongoing undercurrent rather than a single moment. You might find yourself grieving, lost simplicity, the ease that other families seem to have, like spontaneous outings, straightforward routines, and fewer layers of planning. Lost spontaneity, having to prepare for everything, checking environments all of the time, anticipating triggers, and managing transitions. Even small activities can require significant emotional and logistical effort. The emotional impact. Because ambiguous loss is not always recognized, people often struggle alone with feelings such as chronic sadness that comes and goes, guilt, I shouldn't feel this way, confusion, why do I feel grief when nothing has happened, isolation, no one else seems to get this, emotional fatigue from carrying unresolved feelings. One of the most difficult aspects is disenfranchised grief, grief that isn't socially acknowledged or validated. And this can lead people to suppress or minimize their own emotional experience, which can often increase stress over time. the both and reality. One of the most important therapeutic ideas is learning to hold two truths at once. This could be, I deeply love this person and this situation is emotionally difficult. Or, I accept myself as I am and I still feel sadness or frustration about limitations I experience. These are not contradictions, they are normal human emotional experiences. Trying to force yourself into only one, I should be positive, often leads to emotional suppression. Allowing both creates psychological flexibility, which is linked to better coping and resilience. Emotional complexity. When emotions become mixed or conflicting, people often judge themselves. So, for example, I shouldn't feel resentful, or I should cope better, or perhaps I shouldn't feel grief, and lastly, I should just stay positive. But emotional suppression usually increases stress. Psychological flexibility comes from allowing emotions to exist without shame. Here is a reflection for you to consider quietly. What have I grieved privately? What pressures do I place on myself emotionally? What emotions have I struggled to admit? Emotional awareness tool. When emotions run high, reactions become fast and automatic. Instead of reacting immediately, try pausing and asking, what am I actually feeling right now? Not just stressed, angry, or upset, but more specifically, overwhelmed, trapped, unsupported, frightened, emotionally exhausted, guilty, or maybe unheard. Research on affect labeling shows that naming emotion helps reduce their intensity. In simple terms, if you can name it, you can begin to manage it. Behaviour is communication. All behaviour is communication, even when there are no words. Behaviour is not random, it's often the clearest available way a person has to express a need, especially when communication is limited, emotional regulation is difficult, and environments feel overwhelming. Behaviour is often an attempt to express stress. The world can feel too much. Overwhelm. Everything feels like too much all at once. Fear. Feeling unsafe or uncertain. Discomfort. Pain, illness, sensory or physical discomfort. Unmet needs. Needing connection, help, rest, or support. Confusion. Not understanding what's happening. Or maybe fatigue, when the body and the mind are just exhausted. Reframing behaviour. Instead of asking, how do we stop this behaviour? You could try shifting to, what is this behaviour trying to tell us? This shift moves you from control to understanding, from reacting to responding. Another tool you can use is behaviour mapping. I want to encourage you to regularly reflect by writing down the following. What happened before? What did the behaviour look like? And what might this person have been needing in that moment? Over time, patterns emerge, and these patterns can guide proactive support rather than reactive responses. Here is an example of a behaviour mapping diary. Here you can see small observations over time could lead to big changes. For example, you can see that from certain events, an individual just might need more time before transitions and more warning and more choice. They may also need more time to decompress after a busy day or some quiet time to connect. Or if somebody was feeling anxious about something, then maybe they needed some reassurance or some comfort. Trauma-informed perspective. Many individuals with disabilities experience repeated stress, overwhelm, or environments that feel unpredictable or unsafe. Because of this, support should prioritize safety, both emotionally and physically. Predictability, clear routines and expectations. Choice, a sense of control and agency. Connection, feeling understood and supported. Practical impact and family systems. Real life impact areas. Disability doesn't exist in isolation. It affects the entire family system. When looking at the effects of disability, we may look at these key areas. For example, routines, which could be more structured and often less flexible. Finances, there may be additional costs to bear or reduced working capacity. Employment, you may have caregiving responsibilities that affect your career path. Relationships, there may be more strain in relationships, roles may shift, there might be less time for connection. Social opportunities, there may be reduced spontaneity and the potential for isolation. Pressure point check-in. Here is a useful tool that you can use. Regularly pause and ask, where are we most stretched right now? What feels unsustainable? And what are we managing versus just surviving? This can create an awareness before burnout builds. Micro adjustment strategy. Instead of trying to fix everything at once, focus on small, sustainable changes. Remember to build in recovery time after activities. Or you can even shorten activities instead of cancelling them. You could introduce visual schedules or predictable routines. You could reduce unnecessary demands during high stress periods. All of these small adjustments often create meaningful relief. Communication technique, the 80-20 rule. So here I would like you to remember the following. 80% validation and 20% problem solving is all people need to feel understood before they can engage in solutions. Here is an example of how you can communicate validation. So instead of saying, you're okay, don't worry, which can feel dismissive and also minimize what somebody is experiencing, you could try, that felt really overwhelming. I understand, followed by, let's figure out what might help. With the second example, you can see how validating a person's experience can reduce their emotional intensity as they will feel supported in that moment. It can also help increase cooperation and let them feel more able to find solutions. What is emotional respite? It's not just physical time away, it includes emotional recovery, mental space, and permission to pause without guilt. Even short moments of reset can have a cumulative impact. Here is an important truth. You cannot pour from an empty cup, and burnout doesn't happen suddenly. It builds gradually through chronic stress, lack of recovery, and emotional overload. Here is a 2-minute reset tool that you can use. Box breathing, also known as square breathing, is a simple, highly effective stress relief technique. And why it works? So, by taking steady, equal breaths, you signal to your autonomic nervous system that you are safe, and this helps to lower levels of stress hormone in your body. Why not take a moment to give it a go? Breathe in, hold, breathe out, hold, breathe in, hold, breathe out, hold. Typically, you would do this 4 times over, but just see what feels right for you. This is an accessible tool that you can use at any moment. As we come to the end, I want to return to the question, what has been the most challenging part of disability in your family? Now reflect, do I understand it differently? Do I have a new way to respond? And what feels more manageable now than before? You don't need to have everything figured out. Change doesn't come from perfection. It comes from small, meaningful shifts in understanding and response. The goal is connection over control, sustainability over intensity, and compassion over criticism. A closing reflection. What is one small thing you will do differently this week? Think about that for a moment. Hold on to that, because real change doesn't start with everything. It starts with one step done consistently. I hope you have found this short course helpful today. If you need any further support, please visit emotionalrespite.co.uk.